I don't boast when I say cowardice has never been counted among my defects. My service record with the Solar Vanguard speaks plainly enough. 6 deep-range expeditions beyond the orbit of Neptune, 3 emergency atmospheric extractions, and 1 salvage op in the rings of Saturn that should have killed us all. Yet I would not return to Scytheron, not for all the iridium veining its mountains, nor for the pharmaceutical nectars distilled from its fungal seas, nor for the bioluminescent resins that corporations swear will cure half the ailments of Earth. There will always be men and women willing to gamble their sanity for profit. There will always be trading posts hammered into alien soil, and there will always be fools who believe a world can be mastered because it has been mapped. Scytheron was not made for human nerves, nor for human thought. If you doubt me, listen. I was with the first Scytheron landing party under Commodore Vance Calder in 2083. We touched down briefly and fled within 40 hours. Our atmospheric models disastrously wrong. The air was too dense, too chemically aggressive, one breath unfiltered, and you felt your lungs tighten as if wrapped in hot wire. We returned 2 years later better equipped, establishing a forward base on a basalt shelf near the equatorial highlands, what we named the Amaranth Range, for the violet lichens that coated its knife-edged ridges. My name is Elias Bourne, propulsion engineer and 3rd auxiliary pilot in command of the assembled atmospheric crawler, Wayfarer. It was constructed from modules ferried down from the orbital arc, Halcyon Crown. I was the least distinguished among the 5 assigned to the first survey run. The others were luminaries: Dr. Fee, Mara Ionescu, xenobotanist, Professor Kenji Arata, geochemist, Dr. Silas Breen, xenobiologist, Director Halden Cray, Chief of Planetary Acquisition. Calder and the remaining crew stayed with the Halcyon Crown while we began a slow circumnavigation along the equator, 22,000 miles of steaming wilderness. The crawler was state-of-the-art: carbon titanium hull, diamond synthetic viewports, dual antimatter microcores with solar induction backups. It carried gravitic rifles, thermal lances, and spectrum grenades capable of disintegrating a city block. We believed we were prepared. I can almost laugh at that now. Even on the plateau, we wore cooling exosuits and oxygen rigs. The heat alone would have cooked us in minutes. The air shimmered with reactive gases that left metallic frost on our visor seals. As we descended toward the equatorial lowlands, the jungle revealed itself a living ocean of growth, not trees, not in the earthly sense. Towering reed pillars segmented like bone. Vast fan fronds slick as amphibian skin. Vines as thick as bridges, coiling and recoiling as if bored. We struggled for hours to find a clearing. Then we found it. A mile-wide swath carved clean through the forest. Soil freshly exposed. Smooth. Untouched by regrowth. On Scytheron, that was impossible. We landed. I will not pretend I can fully describe what we saw. The jungle did not simply grow, it surged. New shoots burst from soil before our eyes. Fungal mats swallowed carrion in seconds. Barrel-sized flowers excreted narcotic mist over piles of half-dissolved creatures. Insects the size of dogs collided midair. Serpentine things dragged themselves between root systems. Once, something like a 4-legged thunder lizard crashed through the fronds and fled when our thermal beams scarred its hide. Everywhere life feeding life feeding life. Ionescu was pale beneath her visor. It's metabolic acceleration, she whispered. The whole ecosystem is in overdrive. Then we noticed the clearing behind us was already closing. Saplings thrust upward where bare earth had been minutes before. And the swath ahead narrower, fresher. Something had made it, and something was still making it. We lifted and followed the trail. At first we saw only vapor. Then the mist parted. Half a mile ahead, spanning the entire width of the clearing, rose a moving wall of raw flesh. It was the color of exposed muscle wet, glistening, ridged. It swelled and contracted in slow tidal rhythm. No head. No tail, no discernible anatomy, just mass. Life Breen breathed. On a planetary scale, we were accelerating, though I had not increased thrust. Some force pulled us forward. I veered upward at the last second. Below us, the thing flowed through the jungle like a glacier made of living tissue. Forest vanished beneath it without sound, save a wet susurration. Then the sky darkened with winged predators the size of gunships. They struggled against an unseen pull, dragged downward. The mass rose in a wave. A hollow formed, clear fluid pooling within. The wave collapsed. The creatures were gone. We should have fled immediately. Instead, we hovered. The surface stilled, and I felt, God help me, I felt that it was aware. A ridge began to rise toward us. Our crawler shuddered as gravity distorted. Engines strained. The ridge shot upward, a pillar of flesh reaching. Cray opened fire. Gravitic rounds punched incandescent cavities into the column. It collapsed in on itself, sealing almost instantly. We gained altitude. The thing followed. We ran through marshlands venting boiling spray, over lakes of burning hydrocarbons, across fungal plains where leviathans bellowed from beneath steaming waters. For a time we lost it in vapor. We made the mistake of landing in the shadow of black stone hills streaked with crimson moss. I do not know what woke me, but I looked into the rear scope and saw it draped over the ridge behind us like a tidal cliff of muscle. It had climbed, it had tracked us. The mass arched overhead. Transparent digestive fluid gathered along its underside. We launched. Too late. It fell upon us. The impact was like plunging into a collapsing sea. Darkness swallowed the hull. The pressure bent reinforced titanium inward with shrieks of metal. Acidic secretion began dripping through microfractures. Silas Breen screamed. The fluid struck his faceplate, burned through, and touched skin. We fired in every direction. Full antimatter surge. Hull alarm shrieking. I felt the engines fighting some obscene magnetism. Breen lay half dissolved on the deck. The crawler's interior filled with superheated alien air. We ascended blindly. 3 of us left alive. It pursued us for miles. Then, without warning, it veered away. Another mass approached from the jungle. Gray this time. Equally vast. They rose against one another like towers, and they devoured. The rear scope was still active, and it was full. The ridge behind us was gone. In its place hung a vertical wall of pulsing flesh, rising from the slope like a tidal cliff that had chosen to stand upright. It blotted out the sky. The surface was not smooth. It was layered, ridged, threaded with faint vascular currents of darker red moving beneath translucent membranes. It quivered rhythmically like breath. Then the underside opened. The flesh simply parted along a widening seam and peeled back in overlapping folds, revealing an interior cavity lined with muscular fronds that flexed inward and outward. Clear fluid gathered along those fronds, thickening, stringing downward in viscous ropes that hissed when they struck the rock near us. The hull alarm screamed. The crawler shuddered as gravity shifted again. It was pulling at us, subtle at first, then stronger. Not suction. Not magnetism exactly, something deeper, something that felt like the planet itself had tilted. "Mara engines," I shouted. She was already moving, brown hair plastered to her visor from condensation, eyes wide but focused. She swung into the auxiliary ignition cradle as Cray reached the gun controls. The flesh descended. It did not crash down. It lowered itself with dreadful patience. As it did, the opening widened further, and I saw that the interior was not empty. The cavity contracted in slow peristaltic waves, layers folding inward toward a darker central core, where the light seemed to vanish. The fluid thickened into sheets, cascading downward. When it struck the hull, the sound was not a splash. It was a sizzle. The outer plating began to smoke. "Fire!" Cray roared. Gravitic bolts tore through the descending mass, punching brilliant cavities through tissue that vaporized in bursts of incandescent steam. But the holes did not remain holes. The surrounding flesh liquefied and flowed. sealing the wounds as if irritated rather than injured. The pull intensified. We rose a meter, then dropped 2. The seam widened again and something extruded, tendrils, not separate limbs, not fully distinct from the body, but elongated filaments of semi-solid tissue that stretched downward and split at their tips into frilled, sensory-looking fans. They swayed, tasting the air. When one brushed the hull, it adhered instantly, flattening and spreading like living resin. The metal beneath it blackened. Mara shouted. Then the crawler lurched violently to the left. One of the tendrils had wrapped around the port side strut. It tightened. The structure screamed. "Cut it!" Ionescu yelled. Cray shifted aim and severed the tendril with a concentrated beam. The detached length writhed on the hull for several seconds before dissolving into steaming slurry. We almost cleared it. Almost. The mass above us surged. Not downward this time, but forward. It flowed over us in a thick crest. The world went dark. The crawler's floodlights illuminated nothing but translucent crimson pressed against every viewport. The interior pressure alarms detonated in overlapping shrieks as the hull flexed inward. The ceiling bowed, and then the fluid began to fall inside. It seeped through microfractures, first clear droplets that struck the deck and began to smoke. One landed on my forearm where my suit seal had been loosened. It felt like being branded with molten wire. Silas Breen screamed. I turned just in time to see a sheet of the fluid pour through a rupture above him. It struck his helmet and clung. The polycarbonate bubbled. He clawed at it, slipping in the dissolving surface. The material thinned, split, and the liquid touched skin. He did not scream long. Mara broke from the ignition cradle and lunged toward him, grabbing his shoulder to pull him clear. That was when the interior membrane ruptured. A section of the ceiling simply collapsed inward as the outer flesh constricted. The opening above us dilated like an iris, and a column of muscular tissue plunged down into the cabin. It struck between us. The impact threw Mara against the bulkhead. The column did not behave like a limb. It did not grab. It flowed around her. She tried to stand, tried to push free, but the tissue spread over her torso and legs with terrifying speed, conforming to every contour. It adhered instantly, tightening. Her scream cut through every other sound in that cabin. I will hear it until I die. The flesh contracted. She was lifted from the deck, not jerked upward, but drawn in as if absorbed by thickening mud. The membrane around her became translucent for one sickening second. I saw her face pressed against it, eyes wide, mouth open, hands clawing at the interior surface that was already dissolving the outer layers of her suit. Then the contraction intensified. The membrane thickened, her outline blurred, and she was gone, not dropped, not torn apart, ingested. The column withdrew, pulling upward through the rupture with obscene smoothness. The opening sealed behind it as if stitched by invisible hands. The hull groaned. Cray fired blindly into the ceiling, screaming wordless fury. I slammed both antimatter cores to maximum surge and triggered the solar induction backup simultaneously. The engines howled. The crawler bucked like a living animal. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the pressure shifted. The flesh around us rippled. Light fractured through thinning layers of tissue. We tore free. The crawler erupted upward from the collapsing crest of the mass in a shower of dissolving organic matter and steaming acid. The sky returned in a violent rush of pale glare and boiling mist. Below us, the thing reformed. There was no visible wound where Mara had vanished. No scar. No sign of resistance. The surface resumed its slow tidal pulse, as though nothing of significance had occurred, as though it had simply completed a meal. We did not speak for several minutes. The seat where she had stood was empty, streaked with smoking residue and fragments of melted polymer. The mass began to follow again, and I understood something then that I wish I did not. It had not attacked in rage. It had not defended territory. It had fed, deliberately, efficiently, and when it rose toward us a second time, It did so with the calm inevitability of something that knows its prey cannot truly escape. We reached the Amaranth Range in delirium. I remember landing, then darkness. I awoke aboard the Halcyon Crown 50 hours later. My left arm was gone below the elbow. The acid had eaten to bone. Commodore Calder told me our story had already spread through the crew. He asked how I had managed to fly us back. I could not answer. A second crawler was dispatched. It never returned. Calder himself led a third crew toward the Twilight Hemisphere, the boundary where Cytherion's tidally locked night begins. Their transmission spoke of multiple migrating masses, of oceans birthing them. Then silence. We abandoned the planet, returned to Earth. I have not left solid ground since. Mining firms still operate there. Shipments of neo-manganese alloys disappear. Outposts vanish between supply runs. They blame tectonics, weather, human error. But I know, Cytherion is not a world of continents and seas. It is a feeding ground, and somewhere beneath those steaming jungles, something without eyes or brain or mercy still moves, patiently carving mile-wide paths through forests that regrow in minutes, waiting for the next landing.